What if the person who brings your past back to life was never meant to stay? He didn't rush. He didn't demand answers. He waited believing that silence might one day turn into hope. But some truths don't arrive through conversation. They arrive quietly, when you least expect them to. This is not a story about rejection. It's a story about realization, about how letting go can hurt less than holding on, and how peace begins the moment you stop waiting to be chosen. Have you ever noticed how a single person can quietly reopen a chapter of your life you thought was already closed? Not with drama, not with noise, but with a feeling that settles gently in your chest and refuses to leave. Yuya is not someone living in crisis. On the surface, his days are ordinary, even stable. He moves through familiar routines, surrounded by people he trusts, anchored by a family that feels steady and safe. And yet, like many adults, there is a quiet emotional undertow beneath that stability, a sense that something meaningful was left unfinished somewhere in the past. Not broken, not lost, simply unresolved. That feeling begins to take shape when Yuki returns. She comes back without ceremony, stepping once again into Yuya's daily orbit while working at a private kindergarten run by his older sister. To others, her return is practical, temporary, unremarkable. But for Yuya, it feels like time folding in on itself. Her presence does not disrupt his life. It awakens it. Memories surface not dramatic flashbacks, but subtle emotional echoes. The kind that remind you of who you once were before responsibilities solidified your identity. Yuya has carried his feelings for Yuki quietly for years, not as a longing that demanded action, but as a gentle appreciation woven into his understanding of youth itself. She represents a version of life that was lighter, more open, less guarded. And when she reappears, those feelings don't intensify so much as they become clearer. It's as if his heart, long muted, finally finds the right frequency again. What makes this moment psychologically powerful is not the affection itself, but Yuya's awareness of it. He doesn't romanticize his feelings or rush to define them. Instead, he begins to notice the space they occupy inside him, the warmth, the hesitation, the quiet hope that something meaningful could still be expressed honestly, even now. Over many nights of reflection, Yuya confronts a question many people avoid. Not, what if this works? But what if I never say anything at all? The cost of silence begins to feel heavier than the risk of truth. And so, when he finally speaks, his words are not dramatic or demanding. They are simple, sincere, human. Yuki listens. She is moved, not because she is promised anything, but because she recognizes the courage it takes to reveal a feeling without expectation. And then, before anything can settle into certainty, the moment dissolves. An interruption, a shift in tone, a return to everyday conversation. Nothing is resolved, yet something irreversible has already begun. What follows is not rejection, and not acceptance either. It is something far more unsettling for the human mind: ambiguity. Yuya does not spiral. He does not chase reassurance or force another conversation. He appears composed, respectful of the moment that slipped away unfinished. But internally, a quiet tension begins to grow. He tells himself he is patient, and in many ways he is. Yet patience can sometimes disguise avoidance. Waiting feels safer than knowing. As long as the outcome remains undefined, hope remains intact even if fragile. Yuya begins to notice how his emotional world subtly reorganizes itself around that hope. He listens more carefully to Yuki's tone. He reads meaning into small pauses. His days are not disrupted, but they are quietly influenced. This is not obsession. It is attachment seeking resolution. When feelings are acknowledged but not answered, the mind naturally tries to complete the narrative. Yuya's mistake, if it can be called one, is not loving Yuki, but placing his emotional closure outside of himself. Without realizing it, he begins to wait not for Yuki, but for permission to move forward. Yuya does nothing wrong. He respects boundaries. He avoids pressure. He continues living his life. And yet, there is a subtle emotional cost to staying suspended. Each day that passes without clarity reinforces the belief that timing, rather than choice, will decide his future. Yuki, meanwhile, remains kind and present. She does not withdraw, nor does she advance. Her behavior is consistent, but consistency without definition can be confusing when one person is emotionally invested. Yuya tells himself that if he waits long enough, the situation will naturally reveal itself. He is slowly learning that silence can be comforting, but it can also quietly drain energy. Still, he does not feel trapped. He continues forward, unaware that the moment that will reshape his understanding is approaching not through confrontation, but through listening. The moment of realization doesn't arrive with drama. Yuya accidentally overheard Yuki's phone conversation, not intentionally, but unintentionally. He understands the truth. She is already living inside a future that does not include him. Not because he failed, and not because he waited too long, but because her emotional world has quietly taken shape elsewhere. What follows is sadness, but not collapse. From a psychological perspective, this is the moment attachment gives way to acceptance. Yuya feels disappointment without humiliation, grief without resentment. He does not confront Yuki or demand clarity because he understands that affection does not guarantee reciprocity and sincerity does not ensure alignment. For the first time, he recognizes how much energy he has spent waiting, interpreting, and hoping. Letting go tightens his chest, then softens it. The pain remains, but it is clean. His feelings become gentler, less urgent, like a memory carefully placed on a shelf. What he values now is not the outcome, but his ability to feel deeply and honestly. Yuya's peace does not come from being chosen. It comes from choosing himself, releasing expectation, reclaiming self-trust, and allowing reality to be what it is. Emotional growth, he learns, is not avoiding pain, but feeling it without being defined by it. If this story resonates, pause and reflect on where you may be waiting for someone else to give you peace. If you found value here, like the video, subscribe for more reflections on psychology and life, and share your thoughts in the comments.